Well, first of all, my name's Ken Finlayson, and I'm running as a candidate for the People's Party of Canada in the riding of Kamloops-Thompson-Cariboo. All right, well, I'm raised on a mixed farm and ranching operation back in Saskatchewan, where my family's been since the late 1870s. So we have deep roots there. I'm a strong believer in how good this country is. I've been involved in politics all my life, not by choice. My great-grandfather was a Liberal member for 28 years in Saskatchewan, so I was born a Liberal. As I got older and wiser, I changed. I'm basically a conservative in my politics. I actually ran as an independent for the Conservative Party 2 years ago, when the then former Minister of Agriculture, Jerry Rich, resigned his seat. And I worked for Jerry. We're good friends. And anyway, what happened back then was I wouldn't stick to script. And it turns out there was about 5 other candidates. And the vetting committee, after vetting me, decided that, because I wouldn't stick to script, they would not touch controversial issues. And I don't know if you remember, but 2 years ago we had something called the Gerald Stanley trial in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, and there was huge racial implications and rural crime, which is epidemic in Saskatchewan. North Battleford, where I lived at the time, has led Canada for 10 consecutive years as the most dangerous neighborhood in Canada. So what do you think the constituents wanted to talk about? But the Conservative Party told me that we wouldn't touch that with a 10-foot pole. It was just too controversial. And it's the same as we see now with the People's Party. We have candidates. We believe in free speech. That's a big thing. And you as university students should appreciate that. We hate censorship. And I mean, look what Andrew Scheer's done to his own MP, a guy called Cooper. He censored him. They took the right out of the Hansard, the parliamentary record. Oliver Cromwell couldn't get away with it, but they censored Hansard. They had another candidate, a professor, Salam Mansour. He's a Muslim intellectual, a real leader, and Andrew Scheer turned his candidacy down because he felt, this man's a Muslim, spoke out against Islamic extremism, that it was, too controversial. So he kicked him out. Well, that was a good thing for us, because now he's a candidate for the People's Party of Canada. But here's an example of the party censoring candidates that want to talk about issues that are relevant. Sure, they're controversial. What else should you do? If it's controversial, maybe that's where you should put your focus. And the People's Party does not muzzle its candidates. If you've got 10,000 people, that want to talk about something, and universities are famous for, being centers for free speech, they should appreciate this. So that's one of the things that attracted me to the People's Party. We're allowed to speak our mind. Doesn't mean you have to agree with us, doesn't mean we agree with you, but you know what? We need the dialogue. There's no use sticking your... And the Salam Mansour guy, he's an articulate professor. He's precisely the kind of candidate, he's precisely the kind of Canadian that we need to deal with the question of Islamic extremism, because he's a Muslim. Us non-Muslims can't fix it. It has to come from within. So we should welcome this guy. Conservatives kicked him out. Too controversial. We'll stand up. Well, first of all, this is a federal election. If you got a pothole out here that needs fixing, don't phone me. Phone the mayor. So we got to deal with federal issues. And there are some things that federal politicians can do and should be doing, and we're not doing. And coming from the prairies, I manage a small ranch up here for some people at Lac La Hache for the last year and a half. That's my background. But coming from the prairies, I don't know a lot about trees, because we don't have a lot of big trees on the prairies. And what I do know about BC, and I've worked here before, is logging and the forestry is a huge, huge industry, not just for BC, but for Canada as a whole in terms of economics and exports. So I've got a good friend who owns a large trucking and forest company in British Columbia. And so I said, geez, Greg, you got to help me out on this. Tell me what's happening with the forest industry. And he says, and I read another article online by Mr. Burke, I believe he owns 3 sawmills in northern BC. And I said, Greg, what's going on here? What should I know? And he says, well, here's what you should know. We got a perfect storm coming in the logging industry. And here's what happened. Apparently, before the Beatles showed up, they used to harvest somewhere in the order of 60 million board feet a year of lumber. And it's regulated by the government. But when the Beatles showed up, they killed a whole bunch of trees. And it was a case of use it or lose it. So why waste it? So they harvested all that beetle kill wood, which meant they had to gear up the infrastructure, whether it was trucking or sawmills or labor force or whatever. The forest industry rose to the cause. And they did. They handled it. And they went up to 80 million board feet per year. Well, now the beetle wood's all gone. And the beetles, sure enough, they did some damage. There's less trees here than there used to be. So the harvest had to be adjusted, and adjusted downward. And when they adjusted it downward, they didn't go back to where it was, 60 million. They went down to 40, 20 million board feet lower. So that means there's a lot less material. But here we've got this huge infrastructure that was built to handle 80 million board feet per year. So what's going to happen? Well, they're going to close. They've got to go broke, a good portion of them. And that's not the government's fault. That's the Beatles. And we can't do much about Beatles unless you know something about them that I don't. But you know, that kind of stuff just happens. But there's some other things the government has done or failed to do that we should be dealing with. And one is the stumpage fee. And the man that's the president of our EDA, he has had an increase in taxation when he delivers a load of, and I'm talking increase of over $1,000 a load. And he's an independent trucker already working on a skinny margin. So guess what he did? He parked his truck. If he keeps hauling logs, he's been parked for 3 months. If he keeps hauling logs, he just goes broke faster and deeper. So what's happened? Our government has a stumpage fee that's tied to the price of lumber, and that makes perfect sense. You know, if the price of lumber is high, you can afford to pay a little bit more for the privilege of harvesting it. And if the price of lumber is low, you know, sounds like a good idea. Except like all government bureaucracies, it doesn't work very good. The stumpage fee right now, last year lumber was worth pretty near double what it is today. So they increased the stumpage fee. Now a year later, the stumpage fee has remained the same, but the price of lumber has dropped by pretty near half. So you don't have to be much of a businessman to figure that out. And the mystery, the bureaucracy of the government, I don't know if you guys ever noticed, but did you ever notice how long it takes the price of gas to go up at the service station on the corner when the price of gas goes up? If there's an increase in gas prices, you know about it in the morning when the door opens. In this age of computer-generated information, there's no excuse for this stumpage fee to remain where it is a year later. But it generates a lot of income for the BC government. Meanwhile, truck drivers and mills are going broke, and I don't have to tell you about that. There's lots of evidence. So that's something the government can do, and we should be. Now, just to expand on that a little bit more, one thing that we can do as federal politicians that needs to be done, we can't do much about beetles. We can't do much about provincial stumpage fees. But what we can do something about is international trade relations down here at the border with Washington, where there's currently a 22% duty on our lumber going into the United States, which is effectively blocking us from one of the hugest markets in the world. So bad as things are in the lumber industry, it doesn't help when we can't export to the biggest market in the world with that 22% duty. So how do we as Canadian politicians get rid of that? Well, I'll tell you how. When we go into trade negotiations with guys like Donald Trump, who I don't personally care for, but I like the way he runs his country. If I was an American, it hurts when you're a Canadian. When you sit down at the negotiating table with a hard-nosed entrepreneur like Donald Trump, you better bring something to the table more substantial than plastic straws and gender issues. So what have we got to put on the table that Trump might be interested in? We've got supply management. Our party is going to get rid of supply management because it's the opposite of everything we as conservatives stand for, you know, except for Andrew Scheer, who thinks he's a conservative. Anyway, so if we brought supply management, if we put it on the table, and we didn't under this Liberal government, we would deliver to Trump thousands, maybe millions of votes in states like Wisconsin, Iowa, Illinois, Vermont, New York, where all them dairy farmers are, because they would gain access to the Canadian market. Now that's not the end of the world for us Canadians. In fact, it's $600 per family easier to live. We got 9,000 dairy farmers. Max Bernier has offered to buy them out in the order of $5 billion. That's a lot of money. They don't want it. They like price controls. Now, how good a deal is this? I don't care if you're running a tattoo parlor or a trucking company. Anytime the government comes in, apparently for a dairy farm you have to pay in the order of $40,000 per cow for the quota, which is effectively a license. That's before you buy the cow. Just the right to buy her costs $40,000 a cow. So 100 cows is $4 million. I don't think we're talking family farms here. That's not loose change. So the family farm is not an issue here. These are big corporate farms. If it takes $4 million to even get the license. Now, Max Bernier has offered to buy those licenses, or quotas is the proper word for it. Where can you find a proposition where you can sell your trucking company, your tattoo parlor, your Dairy Queen or whatever, where the government will pay you for the business and let you keep the business? How good a deal is that? Why would they object to it? And it's good for Canadians. Everybody gets, less expensive milk products and chickens and pork. We get rid of the marketing boards. We get rid of price controls. And Trump, I shouldn't say Trump would go for it, but he's an entrepreneur. But I'll tell you one thing, that would appeal to him more than plastic straws, because we would deliver those states, those dairy states to him in terms of votes. That's an entrepreneur's mindset. Plastic straws and gender issues aren't. And, I don't like Trump, but you know what? We're stuck with them. We better figure out how to deal with them. Okay, well, more than just our writing, I guess it's a problem right across Canada for students with, inflation. But first of all, nothing's free. So we need to change our focus. Instead of spending these billions of dollars that we currently spend and send overseas to build roads in Africa and pipelines, we're building pipelines in China. We can't get one down here to Burnaby. Anyway, so once we have that money, we'll do those cutbacks. Then we can enhance our programs for students. Now, one good thing that we have here in BC, and I don't know whose idea it was, but it's a BC thing and it's a good thing, and that's interest-free student loans. If it's true, and I think it is, we got several hundred years of proof that universities are an investment in the country's future, we should be investing here at home, not building roads in Africa or whatever, So we need to cut back significantly on our foreign aid so we can change our priorities, and certainly. And then the other issue is student housing. I think, especially here in British Columbia, housing seems to be really expensive. And so I don't like to see the government interfering in the marketplace, but we need to get out of the road, so that people can build apartments for students. And I think historically that's been the case with universities too. There's a certain, not a responsibility, but we have a history of student residence on campuses. We need to expand that, yeah, so we're good there. We'll focus on Canada. Well, our strategy once again is basically market orientated. And after I saw those questions, I went online. And I'm sure you've got resource people here that can help students to access various subsidies and programs. Now, one thing I did notice, there are all kinds of housing subsidies for almost everybody, low-income people, except students. I don't get that. Am I right there? Is that right, Lee? Anyway, so I was surprised to learn that. Students should be included in that low income because, how much income does the student really make? Not a lot, right? So they should qualify for those same programs. And I noticed when I went on the government website, they had, I think there was at least 8 or more categories of, various individuals, low income, single parent, so many kids, people that were looking after elders, all kinds of programs for everybody except students. I think we need to include them. Well, basically, we believe in a free market, And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the last time I checked, which probably was a couple of years ago, somewhere in the order of 70% of the people that graduate from these institutions go into a field other than what they studied. So that tells me that what we need to do is get the government out of the road so that we can have a strong economy. And if there's a strong economy, there will be jobs. You know, if your field of study is Cambodian fruit flies, we might not be able to help you. But if we've got a strong economy here in Kamloops, you'll find something to do, especially if it pays enough. That'll change your priorities. Well, I think I'm going to get that lady in the States to send me a copy of that new Green Deal, because that sounds pretty good to me. You know, and we could get rid of all them pesky airplanes and their carbon footprint, and we could cancel all the pipelines, and we could all sit around a campfire full of electric logs and sing Kumbaya. How's that for pie in the sky? Well, you asked for pie in the sky. I'm a night owl. I don't like either one. I like meat and potatoes. I like the Beatles. I'm an old guy. Well, I guess the Rolling Stones, nobody's older than them. But I like the Beatles. I like to travel. Mark Twain says travel is the enemy of ignorance, and I believe that's true. I'm an ex-truck driver. I'm living proof that coffee can't kill you. I don't like either one of those. I like porridge. I'm not much good at laying around. I like the mountains. Well, you know, I like dogs, but I'd rather own a cat. They take care of themselves. I like beer. I love dining in. I hate delivery. Well, I think I'd have a cabin in the mountains. Well, I wear tall boots, so I got to have tall socks.